Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here. Today I'm going to look at one of, well, almost everyone's favorite openings, the Exchange Slav. Why am I going to do this? Well, actually I've had this in my mind to do for some time. And I've covered a couple of my games in this opening a long time ago. And really I want to say a few things in this opening's defense. So one thing I want to say about it certainly is that it's a nice way to take a day off. And I don't necessarily mean to play for a draw. Rather, what I mean is that the main lines of the Slav, or even worse, the semi-Slav, are so unbelievably theoretical that, you know, you're taking your life in your own hands and you've got to spend a great amount of time and energy preparing and memorizing. Okay, so that's, you know, and then, you know, keeping up with the line and making sure that it stays memorized. So all of that is really a great deal of work. So every once in a while it's nice to just play chess. Now, that's one thing in its favor. Second thing in its favor is that it's a very effective weapon to use against most, well, many kids and players in general who just don't really like quiet positions. It obviously lends itself to quieter waters. The pawn structures tend to be a little bit more tame, a little bit more sedate. And, you know, if you like endings or if you like technical play, it's not a bad way to try to just grind your opponent down into the dust. And it's something that I use from time to time, especially against talented young juniors. So that's a second thing in its favor. A third thing in its favor is, well, in a way this is going to go against what I just said, but I want to propose today that it's actually a bit more interesting than you might think. And I want to show 3 games, or at least some game fragments, I think 1 game fragment and 2 full games, that indicate that this can really be quite a lively opening. It doesn't have to be quite so sedate if the players choose to let things liven up a bit. So I had this in mind to do a show on this opening anyway. And what secured it for me, or what cinched it, was that today in the Amber tournament there were 2 games in the Exchange Slav, and both were really very, very interesting and exciting games. So the first one that I just want to look at, the opening of this one, was Kramnik-Gelfand from the blindfold session. So this is from round 5 of the 2011 Amber tournament. For those of you who aren't watching this right away, Kramnik had white, plays the exchange. And, okay, so this isn't all forced, but this is one kind of typical approach. Black, well, we notice a few things. So one is that white hasn't rushed to develop his king side, so he's bringing out the queen side first, putting the rook on c1, and black plays a6, even when it's not through a Chebanenko Slav move order, and this stops any, well, not only knight to b5, which generally doesn't work because of queen a5 check if nothing else, but also stops bishop to b5, which is an important variation. The drawback of playing a move like a6 is that it's weakening the dark squares like c5 and b6 some. And it's also, you know, not a developing tempo. Okay, now Kramnik played knight f3, e6, queen b3, and the threat to the pawn is a genuine one. Black has to do something about it. Well, bishop to d6 is what he chose, and this has been played before. And here Kramnik played a move that hasn't been played at a high level before, but it has been played in 3 earlier games. And white actually went 2.5 out of 3 there. So it's queen takes b7. And this is a queen sack, because, as many of you know, if a player has played a6 or a3, if it's white, against a threatened, let's say, poison pawn attack, then after it's taken, knight to a5 often just grabs the queen, I should say. So the bishop covers b4, the c-file squares are all covered, and b3 is covered by the knight, and b5 is covered by the pawn. That's what that one is doing. But this was Kramnik's idea, and he just takes and plays bishop takes d6. And, all right, materially speaking, it's an even trade, more or less. White has a rook, bishop, and a pawn for the queen. Black can't castle. And if he goes to d7, he could get hit by knight e5 at some point. So, you know, I don't know if this promises white any advantage, but as I said, it's done pretty well in practice. Now, in the earlier games, black played knight c4, white traded and castled. You know, you'd like to play knight e5, but we don't want to hang the pawn on g2. So, kingside castles, and again, white scored very nicely here. Gelfand, I don't know if it was his prep. I should have checked to see the times to see if he actually was prepared for this as well, which would be kind of ridiculous. But anyway, he played king to d7, which was a new move. Kramnik played bishop c5, rook to b8. Here, Kramnik played knight e5 check. It's okay. He could play b3 and leave knight to e5 in reserve, maybe with the idea of still having knight to h4 as a possibility. Although, to be honest, winning this bishop on f5 is not really a high priority because it's mostly just striking at empty space. It's really not so serious. On the other hand, the knight on e5, well, it looks nice. Sometimes it can be driven away with tempo. Black can eventually play f6 or maybe play knight to d7. So I don't know. Probably this is right. Okay, king e8. But now what Kramnik did was not right. He played b4. And this looks fine. I mean, you're cementing the bishop, but really it's too cemented. We don't want it cemented like this. So this was actually a dubious or maybe even just a full-fledged mistake. What he should have played was b3. So keeping c4 under control, and importantly, giving his bishop an escape route to a3 if it needs it. Because this bishop is really good. I mean, this is the extra bishop, and you can see, I mean, black is just not really set up to fight for the dark squares. So he should keep this guy. And then, who knows? I mean, it would just be a very interesting position. Unfortunately for Kramnik, he played b4, and unfortunately for this idea. And now when Gelfand played knight to b7, this bishop is in trouble. So, continued knight a4, knight takes c5, and now whatever Kramnik does, he's worse. Probably the best move is knight takes c5, but here you can see now black is out of the bind. And if knight takes b4, queen takes b4, and I'm not even sure. I don't think that white can even get away with that, really. If he can, I mean, it's going to be by a thread, but I believe that black's attack is going to be very fast and very dangerous. So queen b7 is really a good move. In the game, Kramnik tried b takes c5, and it's a nice pawn, definitely, but again, black now has access to the b file. His heavy pieces come into the game, or at least they will fairly quickly, and it's a downhill slide now for white. So he played knight to b6, trying to plug up the file, but queen c7, threatening rook takes b6. Kramnik played king d1. Now knight to e4 threatens knight takes f2. f6 is coming as well, so Kramnik leaves without being asked. And now Gelfand sacks the exchange here for a pawn. So right now white has two rooks for the queen, but the rook on h1 isn't exactly causing black any anguish at this point. So white is really undeveloped, and it matters. So here's how the game concluded. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. f3, knight to d6, knight c5, queen b2, g4, bishop to b1, takes and threats bishop to b3. Well, at some point, no real rush for that, but it could happen fairly soon. Okay, rook to c2, queen b1, rook c1, there's bishop to b3. And if knight takes, then queen takes check, followed by knight to c4, probably. Well, no, queen to b2 check, and then perhaps knight to c4. And yeah, let me just show you this. So takes. Okay, let's say king here to protect the pawn. Oh no, what am I talking about? Sorry, queen a2 check, just winning the bishop. So king to d2, and same thing, of course. So it can't really take, and can play rook to c2, probably. But after queen e3, I mean, this whole agglomeration of pawns is going to be an X-agglomeration momentarily. So, Kramnik played king to d2, check, king up, check, check, and now it's time for Kramnik to start giving things back. So here comes the interest. So right now, it's still a rook piece and a pawn for the queen, but there goes the e-pawn. There goes the f-pawn. Okay, he takes care of any back rank issues or perpetual possibilities. And yeah, that was game over. So he's losing a third pawn, probably a fourth pawn. Knight's in trouble. It's game over. Really, everything fell apart after b4, knight to b7, followed by knight takes c5. But the queen sack idea is quite interesting and definitely playable, just that white has to play b3 here and not b4. Okay, Well, now what I wanted to show you were a pair of games, and I want to show that this idea works for either color. And the idea is to advance the pawns on the king side. So very often in the exchange Slav, all the play seems to be on the queen side, and it's just whether white can kind of massage black over there, create some weakness, gang up on it, and win in 50 moves. Well, sometimes things get a bit more lively, and this is a game between Yasser Seirawan and Alexander Bilyavsky, played in the World Cup in Brussels in 1988. And Seirawan, I assure you, did not play this as a drawing weapon. He was definitely playing for a win. He just liked to play this kind of slow, positional, grinding approach. Now, one of the reasons why the exchange Slav has a really bad name is that white sometimes plays bishop to d3, and these are prearranged draws. So black takes, and then plays bishop to d6 himself, and both sides castle, and give or take a move or two or three, you'll find hundreds of draws like this in the database. Okay, clearly this is not serious chess, but there's no reason why white has to play that way. All right, so white has a number of moves here, and of course he's already committed in some ways with knight f3. Okay, so real options include knight to e5. Probably black's best here is to take, and then play knight to d7, and only then develop the bishop from f8. You don't want to play bishop to d6 just yet because queen a4 check is kind of annoying. Knight to d7 just blunders the bishop on d6. Queen to d7 blunders the queen to bishop to b5, and nothing else is left. Well, b5, and that's obviously not a smart move. So knight to d7, and one interesting line is queen to b3. Takes, takes, and now white threatens both to take on b7 and to play bishop to b5 check. Black's best is to ignore, in a sense, both, but not really. The king is okay on f8. It wouldn't be okay on e7. And queen takes b7 can be played, certainly, but black will get counterplay quickly. He'll castle and then play rook to b8. And he has the bishop here, too. Okay, so this is probably best, and it's about equal. Another important line is queen to b3. And here, black should play bishop to b4, I think. White plays bishop to b5, castles, and then here, white can choose a couple of approaches. There's taking on c6, which involves a pawn sack, but it's a good one for black if he knows what he's doing. So he could play b takes c6. I think maybe Anand played like this against Kramnik. I can't remember. Maybe it was rook c8. Game one from their World Championship match. So it was in this line, but I don't remember if he played bc or rook c8. So this is actually an equal position. White shouldn't take the pawn on c6. I'm not sure if it loses right away, but it's definitely not worth the trouble. So bishop takes c6 is one option. A second option is just a castle, and then black swaps and plays rook c8. And white has some chances for an edge here, but it's, objectively speaking, it's about equal. Okay, so these are all kind of slow play systems. Bishop to b5 is another very legitimate try for white. So playing here right away, hoping to play knight e5, queen a4, and build up on this pin knight before black finishes developing. So one good move here is knight to d7. And now, all right, white has a number of moves here. It can play queen a4, for instance. This is a main move. And then, for instance, rook c8, bishop takes, rook takes. And if white goes pawn grabbing with queen a7, black has a couple of good options here. So he can play queen c8, which is the main move. But maybe bishop to d3. This might be pretty good too, trying to simply prevent castling. So you can try either of these. I don't really want to go into the theory of this, so I want to get to our main game. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I do want to show you one thing. Here, queen c8, queen a5 is forced because of the threat of rook to a6. And now rook a6 is possible. White can play queen c7 then. But one interesting way to go is bishop to d3 now. Maybe white should play rook to d1 here, but in a game between Huzman and Shirov, played in Izmir in 2004, white played king to d2. b6, queen a7, bishop b4, rook h to c1, bishop to b5, finally has to save it, king d1, takes, takes, bishop a6, a4, castles, a5. So white is trying desperately to, first of all, rescue his queen, and maybe to get some kind of open line for his pieces to use on the queen side. but it's not so easy. Anyway, now here's kind of a foretaste of what we have to look forward to. Shirov plays g5, and after bishop g3 plays f5. So here he comes. And there's a few points to this. I mean, one is that there's just tracking down the bishop and trying to open up some lines over there, but also rook f7, aiming to just collect the queen. So white played knight to d3, f4, he takes f4, and now rook c7. And goodbye queen, and black won a few moves later. Okay, so that was a little bit unusual, but we'll see that that kind of idea is actually more common than you might suspect. And it definitely can give the exchange Slav some life. So bishop to e7, and here queen to b3 I believe is the main move. Let me see. Actually rook c1. No, rook c1 and queen to b3 are both about equally played. On queen to b3, here black should play probably g5, believe it or not. So bishop to g3, h5, and we'll see something like this in our game. So without getting into any theory, let's just see how the game went. So bishop takes c6, bc. Here white could probably bail out with knight to e5 with approximate equality. Black has the bishop here, white has some pressure on the c file. So instead, Sirwan played rook c1. Rook c8, knight a4. Again, knight e5 is about equal. It's kind of a bailout. But Sirwan is just playing systematically. You know, everything is happening on the queen side, and he just wants to clamp down on the c5 square. Maybe play knight e5 at some point, trade off the knight, put the knight on c5, and just massage the c6 pawn and maybe the a4 pawn. And if black defends like a genius, he draws in 60 moves. If not, he loses in 60 moves. Well, Bilyavsky has another idea. g5. Bishop g3, h5. So this is not going to be about the c6 pawn anymore, or the c5 square, or any of these nice, general, patient, positional approaches or ideas. Rather, this is going to be about whether black can simply give checkmate to the white king, or at least trap some pieces along the way. Okay, here white perhaps could try knight to c5, but even this is not so clear after g4. I think white's only move here to stay alive is knight d7, and then this is, who knows what's going on here. This is just very, very murky. Instead, Sirwan played the quiet, restrained h3. g4, takes, and he's probably thinking, what can possibly go wrong here? Yes, the h-file is open, but it's not like the black queen can just jump to h5 or something. So we've got all these pieces in the way, and in the meantime, white can run away if he needs to. All right, well, let's see if this is really true. Okay, if knight to d2, bishop to b4, and, well, it's actually faster than you might think. Queen g5, queen h5, lights out. Okay, if knight to h2, trying to just physically plug this thing up, well, knight f6, and, all right, this is cooperative, but let's just look at a cooperative variation to see. Knight c5, takes, knight e4, and okay, if knight takes g4, queen g5. But queen g5 is coming anyway, and it's horrible. Black is winning there. So Sirwan played knight e5, which looks quite okay. Takes. If de, then c5, as I think Nunn points out somewhere, and black has a nice advantage. Just a positional advantage here thanks to his bishops. White was unable to blockade the c5 square now that his pawn's on e5. So bishop e5, f6, bishop g3, king f7. So there's the route, right? You look at a position like this and you think, gee, how in the world does the black queen get to the h-file? Because if it can't get there, then white's fine. He plays knight c5, queen a4, and carries on with his with business as usual. But after king f7, well, we see it's not going to be business as usual after all. The queen is just going to go to g8 and then h7, or we go the other way around, rook h5 and queen h8. And all of a sudden, well, it's very crude, but it looks like it's going to be pretty effective. White could try f3 to simply give his king a little cubbyhole, but he's got big problems here too. For instance, gf3, queen f3, queen g8, knight c5, queen g6, and we're just going to double on the g file here. maybe even triple in some cases. And what does white do? If rook f3, we just triple up, or we play, no, sorry, if rook f3, we play rook to g4, goodbye queen, it's just trapped. And on king f2, rook g4, queen f3, and now we just give her to this guy, so we can play bishop to e4, and the bishop falls, or white can give away the queen if he wants, but either way, he's losing big material now. So f3 isn't salvation for white. So rook e1, and now, as mentioned, not queen g8, that might be okay, but even better is rook h5. Okay, now, if white tries to run away with king f1, it doesn't quite work. Queen a5 is kind of a nasty shot here, to simply play queen to b5 check and lock him in. I'm not really sure there's anything that white can really do about this. For instance, if you come out, then check here, and there's an epaulette mate for you. So the king can't run out, but he's not going to survive sticking around either. So c1 played queen to d2. And now a nice move for Bilyavsky. See if you can figure it out. Probably there's more than one way to win, but Bilyavsky finds definitely the most efficient way to finish the job here. It's really quite nice. Okay, well, you don't want to play queen h8 necessarily, because then king f1 and the queen can't go and cover the light squares on the queen side. And queen to d2 takes away queen a5, so that's not happening. So how do we prevent the white king from running away? The answer, bishop e4. Next stop, bishop to f3, game over. For instance, knight c3, queen h8, king f1, bishop f3, and it's going to be a very quick mate. Knight e2, rook h1, king g1, and you can probably just triple on the file, and it finishes it off quickly. So c1 has played king f1, bishop f3, and that was that. He resigned. So you can see disasters are absolutely possible, and again, it's not just about the boring old queenside grind over there. Okay, let's take a look at our final game, and this was played also today, at least today for me, not necessarily for you guys. This was played between Levon Aronian and Vugar Gashimov in the Amber tournament. This was their rapid game from round 5. Okay, so here we go again. Exchange, and again, notice it's a line where white does not rush to commit the king side. Okay, here instead of bishop to f5, which is a normal move, Gashimov played another normal move, bishop to g4. They're both played pretty regularly. And now, rather than knight to f3, Aronian played f3. Generally, black plays bishop to d7 here, and then g4 can be played anyway. But Gashimov went all the way back to c8. And one advantage of this is that after g4, there isn't necessarily going to be any threat to play g5 to win the pawn on d5, which, you know, here the queen is covering it. That's one idea. Also, it neutralizes queen to b3, since both the d5 pawn and the b7 pawn are guarded this way. So it's reasonable. Anyway, there was an earlier game from this position, just one. It was played between Jan Gustafsson and Richigov in, I guess, some tournament on the Play Chess server, and went bishop to d3, e6, knight g to e2, and white eventually won, but, you know, it's still black is fine. I mean, one way he could play here, I think in the game he played bishop to e7, which was all right. Could also maybe play knight to h5 to try to track this bishop down, and maybe white should in turn play bishop to e5 to attempt to extract some concession before black gets to swap it off. Anyway, Aronian had a completely different idea, though one that's not going to be surprising after what we just saw, and that's g4. Though here it's not with the idea of delivering some quick mate, but it's just a space grab. It's kind of like the old Patriarch's idea. You know, Botvinnik. I think Botvinnik even played this in some exchange Slavs, but also in the exchange Queen's Gambit, also in some Nimzo Indians with, again, c takes d5. So this kind of this big space grab with d4, you know, pawns on d4, e3, f3, and g4, and then often h4 is, it's a legitimate plan. Again, I think one that Botvinnik was perhaps the progenitor of. Anyway, let's see how it works. g6, h4, h6. Here, king f2 is kind of a funny move that I think the computer likes this, but it's actually, this is the kind of move that they used to play in the old days too, in some similar positions, especially in those Nimzo positions that I mentioned. So it's actually a known idea, but Aronian has a completely different and very interesting idea. That it really even impressed the grandmasters who were watching, or at least they were struck by it. I think some of them were a little bit skeptical, some liked it, but it certainly caught everyone's eye. So he played queen to d2, which didn't catch anyone's eye, bishop to g7, and now queen to h2. And this very clever move did grab attention, and it's actually quite a dangerous little trick. I mean, he just wants to play bishop to c7, put the knight on a4, and all of these weak light squares, remember I mentioned that before in that first game we looked at with a6, that this can weaken some dark squares. Well, lo and behold, we see this in stark relief here. So what is black going to do? Perhaps what he should have played was bishop to e6. So combat an unusual concept with another one. So on bishop to c7, queen d7, knight a4, rook c8. So we're just in time. So that knight to b6 is met by, of course, queen takes c7. So the bishop comes back out. Well, the queen goes back to where she came from. Knight c5. And then here, we don't bother saving the bishop, but play either maybe queen to b6 or possibly knight to d7. Either way, trying to evict this knight. And if knight e6, maybe black is okay. He can play knight to f8 in this case to defend potentially weak g-pawn. The second e-pawn made us advance to e5 as well, so it's not really a clear position. I mean, it's very, very, very unusual and a bit murky. And it could turn out that White's big pawn push on the king side, well, he might end up being overextended. So that would at least be one way that Gashimov could have responded to this. All right, it's certainly unclear, but it's at least a legitimate option, something that deserves further examination. In the game, he played routinely with e6, so this gives his queen an extra square after bishop c7, so he doesn't have to walk into queen d4, knight a4, but all the same, it's still a bit uncomfortable, and he's quite cramped here. Now here, Aronian played a3, probably with the idea to play knight a4 without having to deal with queen to b4 check in reply. Well, against this, Gashimov perhaps made a little bit of a panicky move. So he played g5. You can't castle because of bishop to d6, but probably he should have tried to find something else, because this has a tactical problem. Now, he might have seen that after h takes g5, hg5, the queen sack on h8 goes nowhere. But Aronian, the tactical trickster that he is, immediately puts this in big trouble. He plays bishop to d6, and now black is busted. Because if he plays queen d7, well, once again, now we have our knight a4 shot, and again, knight to b6 is coming. Knight c5 may not be so bad either. And this is pretty gruesome. I mean, the threat's just knight to b6, and even if the queen goes back to d8, you play bishop to c7, then knight to b6, and after rook a7, you play bishop to b8, and you simply collect the rook. So Gashimov plays queen to d8, but now tactics, h takes g5, and black cannot recapture because this time it does work. Bishop takes, rook takes, and white picks up the queen and ends up a lot of material ahead. So black had to play knight to g8, and now I like what Aronian did here. So he's basically up a pawn for nothing, but well, just putting it that way puts some pressure on white. Because you think, okay, well, I found this nice tactic, I came up with this clever idea, I've won a pawn, so how do I hold on to it? Do I play g takes h6 and worry about his compensation after, let's say, maybe rook takes, I play knight h3 or bishop h3, something like that, probably knight h3, or maybe he takes with the bishop instead, which maybe makes more sense. Anyway, something like this, maybe he could take with the knight, I mean, any of these ways. Or do I play, I don't know, do I find something else here? What do I do? Well, Aronian decided that worrying about this extra pawn is silly. He can maintain all of his positional advantages without giving anything up except for the pawn by playing g6. So this is an excellent move. So he didn't feel constrained to keep what he had won, right? So again, there's that sense of commitment. I've made all these great moves, found this beautiful idea, I've won a pawn. How can I give it up? Well, if you look at the position, right? So if you think about this position and you're asked before the game, would you take this? All of us would say yes, absolutely. White's position is fantastic here. So don't kind of be stingy and hold on to that pawn greedily as if this is your last penny. Give it back up. And now black has no counterplay, which he would have had in the lines with g takes h6. White has great pressure against g6. Both of his bishops are fantastic. Black has very poor development. So this is just wonderful for white. Okay, Kashimov played knight g to e7, knight g to e2. Here black probably should have castled. This would have been a bit better. After king f7, okay, he's of course trying to defend the pawn on g6. And maybe he feels like his king is a little bit safer there rather than committed to the king side, but it probably is the other way around. Anyway, Aronian played bishop to c7, which was a good move. But after queen at e7, here he maybe made a mistake. Let black off the hook a little bit. He should just have played knight to a4 with the crushing threat of knight to b6. And again, knight to c5 may also be pretty good in some cases. White should just be winning here. So instead he played bishop to b6. And, okay, I'm trying to think. Maybe he didn't like e5 here. And, I don't know. It looks like white can just play knight b6, queen c7, knight a8. Maybe he's thinking queen a5 check, and perhaps this guy is going to get stuck in there. I'm not sure if that's right, but maybe. That might be the case. So maybe I'd have to look at that a bit more seriously. So perhaps for that reason he played bishop to b6, but e5 anyway, and now black is at least a little better than he was. So he's again definitely worse, no question about it. But I think he was just losing. Now maybe there's some more work to be done. But Aronian does it pretty quickly. Bishop to c5, so the bishop finds its way back to a good diagonal. Rook e8, and now a very good move. So again, Aronian is just, the creativity of this guy is really something special. I mean, of course, for all of these guys. I mean, anyone who's 2,700 is just a fantastic player. And, we take it for granted because there are now probably 30 plus people who are over 2,700. But really, I mean, if you wanted to take any of these guys as kind of a model for your own play and study their games and their openings, it would be fantastic. But, Aronian seems to be extra special in this respect. So it's funny, earlier in the game, he forsook the chance to keep an extra pawn and preferred instead to keep some positional advantages. Well, here he does the opposite. So we've seen how he's able to just abuse black on the dark squares over and over again. Well, here he gives up his great dark squared bishop to win a pawn. And in part, it's because black has now weakened himself on the light squares a bit. So it's actually okay. He's kind of gained most of what he can gain with dark square control, and now he takes advantage of the light squared problems. And the point is that, okay, if something like knight takes e7 here, well, white just takes the e-pawn and he's up a pawn, and it's not a bad pawn. If queen takes e7, which is the game, then knight takes d5. Well, you might wonder, why not rook takes e7? Well, the problem is still knight takes d5, because if queen d5, there's bishop c4. Okay, finally, I suppose there's king takes e7, but then you have bishop takes g6, so that doesn't work any better. So black is losing a pawn no matter which of the four ways he chooses to recapture. So he chose with the queen, and after knight takes d5, Aronian again is definitely winning. But here he finishes in spectacular fashion. So queen to d8, as we already saw, this doesn't threaten anything, or at least it doesn't threaten the knight because of bishop to c4. Well, maybe e takes d4 is a bit of a threat, so you might be concerned about that. But Aronian isn't. He plays g5. He's just going to go head hunting. Okay, rook to h8, because if h takes g5, then queen h7 is pretty unpleasant. And actually, what am I talking about? We can do better than that. Oops, sorry. If h g5, then bishop takes g6. This has to be winning. King g6, queen h5, king f5, queen f7, block with something. Okay, not the queen, but, well, it doesn't matter at all. And then, unless I'm hallucinating, this is checkmate. Yep, it is. What else can he try? He could try queen takes g5, of course. But then, if nothing else, well, there are two good moves. I mean, there's rook to g1, which is probably what I would do. But knight c7 is also lurking about. But that could be a little bit messier, maybe queen e3 or some nonsense, and black can pray for some kind of miracle. But just rook to g1 is crushing. So Gashimov played rook to h8, defending that pawn. And, well, bishop takes g6 anyway. King f8. If king takes, then again queen h5 is just too strong. Let's see if we can figure out the mate here. Queen h5, king here, and queen f7. And this threatens both g6 mate and rook takes h6 mate. I don't think he has any good way out of all of this. Oh, well, he does have queen g5. Sorry. So, did I screw this up? Maybe. Let's see. Of course. We play knight f6 check first. That's the solution. Knight f6 check first. Bishop takes, queen f7, bishop g7, and then either g6 or rook h6 mate. There we go. Okay, so it can't be taken. So he plays king f8, knight f6. All right, so white's up, a couple of pawns, but more importantly, he's got a big attack. Black has nothing here. It's just awful. He played king to e7, trying to connect his heavy pieces and maybe have the option of running away, but where can he run away to? Rook takes c6. So another shot, takes, queen e5, and this is just target practice. I mean, really, Gashimov could have resigned here. I mean, it was a rapid game, not blindfold, so really nothing to be done here. If bishop to e6, knight f4 is deadly, followed by bishop to f5 if necessary. So, yeah, maybe even knight to d5 check? Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, Gashimov played king f8. Here, probably the best move was rook to h4. So just bringing the last piece into the attack, heading for f4. But queen f4 was good enough. King e7. And here, okay, again, we could repeat and play rook h4. Or again, if bishop e6, knight f4. But that's fine. Plays knight h7. Threatening queen f7. If nothing else, also threatening g takes h6. So Gashimov played this, here, bishop h7. Now white's up 3 pawns with a crushing attack. Okay, 2 pawns. And, well, now it's going to be a piece. So Gashimov played this and resigned after rook takes g5 because now he's down a piece and 2 pawns. And his king is actually still in trouble. Okay, so a very nice game by Aronian. More to the point for the lecture, or the video, don't want to call it a lecture, so for the video, is that the exchange Slav, again, does not have to be dull. White has, and black for that matter, both sides have actually quite a few plans. We saw Kramnik's queen sack idea, which is very interesting. And both black and white have options with going for a kingside expansion with g5 and h5, or g4 and h4 for white, often with f3 or f6 thrown in to help. So definitely take the exchange Slav seriously for either color. If you're black, you should definitely know what you're doing. So there, even in the straightforward lines, there are some tactical finesses that you need to be aware of, and likewise for white. I mean, black has some tricky ideas sometimes too, but again, it's not just the queen side. There are different ways that you can play. So I've had the exchange Slav, not counting. I think once or twice I used it as a quick draw thing with someone I knew, but a few times. I mean, I think I've had it probably in at least five games in my tournament history, and I believe I'm 5-0 with it in real games, and with both colors, and in some of the games more than one result was possible. So it's, it can be quite interesting. And it can be used as a good weapon too. So anyway, enough about this. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. And let me know. Maybe you have some exchange Slav success stories of your own to share. All right. Thanks a lot. See you next week. Bye-bye.